Hey, it's all with another video. These are the cool people that help support the channel, thanks to them. And today we're going to do yet another Q&A coverage of today's Q&A that had just happened with Josh Allen and in Hazzikostas, or well, the other way around. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the format, I'm going to pose the questions here and read them out loud for you to all to see. So if you want to treat this like a podcast and just listen in, that's totally cool. I'm going to be reading the questions, giving the basically the context of what their answers were, and then providing my thoughts and reactions to them. So let's just get started. The 100% loot RNG in the game with caches, personal loot and trading restrictions, no valid vendors, no upgrade, RNG sockets, Titanforge, Warforge, etc. Can you comment on any areas you'd like to lessen RNG and increase player agency? This is the kind of question where Blizzard, I guess, is being burdened by its own want to broaden the experience and give players multiple different kinds of endgame, PvP, dungeons, raiding. That's the three things that we're going to be talking about. It's cool that doing any of these activities grants you rewards that are interchangeable. So even if you get PvP gear, you can still, for the most part, use it in Mythic Plus or raids and dungeons or whatever, and all that stuff is interchangeable, as I said. The problem there, though, is that now this pool of potential things to get and things to choose from is extremely large. I consider this a problem, especially when you think about Mythic Plus and that Mythic chest that Ian was talking about. It's a very big pool of items that you can potentially get from this chest, and it is nice that Blizzard had gone around to make the Titan Residuum currency that allows you to have a little bit more control over what you get. But as an actual solution to this, I'm not too sure. The only two things I can think of would be to separate gear into its individual buckets. So PvP gear, in order to get it, you have to do PvP, and it's only usable in PvP. Is that okay? I don't think so. The other option would be to put most gear, most rewards, behind some vendor, and all the activities that we do, PvP, dungeons, and raiding, it'll get us this sort of universal currency that we can use to spend on whatever we want. But does that take too much away from the RPG side of the MMO? Does it just turn into a game of pleasing a vendor? I don't know. Next question. Many players feel that gear resets are too frequent and too steep. Will anything be done to address the issue going forward? The short answer was no. Ian took this question as the item level differences between one tier and the next, and this goes into the same old song that they were talking about before. Raiders or PvPers or dungeon runners who are progressing from one tier to the next, they still need to feel rewarded by doing the brand new content. If they feel like they're able to finish the content before even going through the kind of treadmill of having to re-earn rewards to get the necessary power to get things done, well, that just doesn't feel very fulfilling, and for the most part I agree with that. The problem that I have that Ian didn't really talk about aren't so much that there is a big item level jump from one tier to the next or one expansion to the next. It's that when you're trying to transition from one thing to the next, there are two ways to do it. One is you go through and you do the previous content in order to get the gear, and then ta-da, now you're kind of relevant. The other is what a lot of modern WoW is exposed to now, which are these very, very powerful catch-up mechanisms that let you effectively skip entire raids or entire tiers of content in order to get caught up with your friends. And that's not a bad thing. What it threatens to do, though, and this is just my opinion, it's that it shortens the road between becoming a freshly max leveled player versus someone who had fought in numerous battles and beat back the old gods and other such things. Because instead I skipped that, crafted a bunch of stuff that happened to come out in this most recent patch, did a few war friends, and then ta-da, I'm almost darn near heroic ready. I do admit that I do miss the slog of having to work your way up to a certain level that you can participate in. What makes this difficult to address is that, just like the first question, there are so many different things that we can do in the World of Warcraft these days. We can do PvP, we can do Warfronts, we can do LFR, raids of many different difficulties in order to get to the thing that we actually want to do. Going back to the question, though, I think I would like to see a little bit more friction when it comes to going from one tier to the next. Even for a new player, I would like to see them feel like they have to do just a little bit more work in order to become ready for the current content. I don't mean to say that they need to go from, raid number 1 to raid number 2 to raid number 3. That sort of progression creates a sort of toxicity that is very reminiscent of the Burning Crusade, which a lot of people enjoyed. I get it, but there's another side to it that I'll try to talk more on at some other points, where it was just easier for, instead of trying to work your way with your group to get from raid 1 to 2 to 3, you just kind of did your best to impress others so that you can get into raid 3 with a better team as fast as you can. But anyway, let's move on to the next question. It was mentioned before that fun is the ultimate metric that drives the game forward. What are some qualitative and quantitative methods that are utilized to measure not only participation, but actual enjoyment? I found it kind of humorous that the first part of Ian answering this question was talking about the whole MAUs and subscription numbers and things like that, and he insisted, as much as people may not agree with this, he insisted that when it comes to those kinds of numbers, it doesn't influence how they do the game at all. How they do the game, really, Soul? Ian is asserting that they don't design the game around numbers or trying to get people engaged. It's more like a consequence of them just doing something that's fun. I'm actually glad he addressed it and answered it in this way, because it puts the blame on him and his team. It's something that I've tried to say numerous times. It's like, why are you guys trying to defend Blizzard by saying that it's Activision's fault? Why don't you just say that Ian or the team or whoever, that they're just making bad decisions? So the other part of Ian's answer when it comes to qualitative or quantitative measurements to find out, okay, are we doing things right, is the feedback that we're giving. We should know by this point that there are still many players of the World of Warcraft, and they all like to enjoy the game in different ways. Most often than not, the way that I will enjoy the game is something that would offend someone else. It's like, oh my god, what are you doing? It's this sort of feedback, and thankfully throughout this Q&A, they address some of this feedback, and there are some changes that are happening in the game. Those are the kinds of measurements that Blizzard seems to be paying attention to. Next question. PvP item levels aren't keeping pace with the other two primary endgame content activities, Mythic Plus and raiding. What's the philosophy surrounding PvP item levels, and what should be the rate that you receive them? Ian pointed out that there are two kinds of reward schemes that come from PvP, one of which is just filling up that bar and getting that cool reward thing that you get out of it. He explained that to be just a participation reward, although I want to equate that a little bit better with actually winning things in order to get a reward, but for the most part it's just filling up a bar and then you get a thing. Cool. Even better is that when you do fill up that bar, you have a number of choices and selections to make to get the thing that you actually want. This is in contrast to raiding or doing Mythic Plus dungeons, because after you complete the run, you might not get something that you like, or you might not get something at all. So for the most part, Ian was just explaining how the reward structure works, that hey, you fill up the bar, you get something cool. When it comes to higher end PvP, which I think is what this question was trying to address, well, you're going to get the better stuff if you have a higher rating. Moving on. Are you guys going to address the issue where secondaries are more important than the main stat? Ian talked about this one a lot, but for the most part it was, yeah, it's something that they are constantly trying to address. Now keep in mind that the World of Warcraft is constantly evolving and moving and changing and resetting itself after every expansion, so weirdness happens at the start of an expansion if you haven't noticed already. As you're leveling up, the cool awesome rating that you had, like if you had a 60% crit rating, by the time you hit max level, that rating is going to go down to like 20 or 30 or something. When it comes to them addressing situations where primaries are less important than secondaries, just like Ian said, it's a kind of case-by-case scenario or a spec-by-spec scenario where whenever that does happen, it's not something that they want, so they need to stamp it out. You would figure, though, that because it's math, this is something that they can effectively predict, but I have no answer to that. The only thought that comes to mind is that in the ever-present process of balancing and rebalancing the classes, at some point some calculation is going to be off to the point where, oh shucks, I should have more mastery after a certain point because whatever my main stat is just isn't as good anymore. But Ian pretty much rounded up this question by saying that when it comes to small differences in item level, then yes, there might be instances where having better secondaries are going to be more important than that extra 5 item level. But when it comes to bigger jumps, 15, 20 item level, then yes, your main stat should be more important. Next question. When and what will be done to address overwhelming negative feedback about removed portals in old expansions for no valid reason? Before I get to what Ian said, they did give reasons, they talked about it. Just because you don't agree with the reason doesn't make it invalid. But yes, they did listen to the feedback, and they're going to allow a portal to the Caverns of Time in a future content patch. It would be nice if they talked to that certain portal person inside the portal room and just, hey, talk to him, and you just get a selection to just take you to the Caverns of Time right away. So that way we can get this in a hot fix and instead of a patch. But it's okay. People are getting a little something something. And the next question. Hey guys, when will we see more transmog customization? I would love to be able to hide my item slot. Bear chest Zandalari are awesome. And they are. In the future patch, you'll be able to transmog your chest away. I'm wearing this shirt for a reason. But even more hopeful news, they're talking about loosening up the restrictions even more. For the most part, it seemed like they were mostly talking about some of the sillier things that we can't transmog to that you will be able to in the future. I was hoping that they would go as far as, hey, you know what? Plate, mail, leather cloth, let's just loosen all that stuff and just wear whatever the heck you want. I would be extremely curious to see what kind of madness players will be able to make for each other, because for the most part, when you look at certain pieces of gear, there's a lot of stuff that you would think would be like, wow, that's a crazy looking chest. Wow, that's cloth? Really? I think that there are a ton of people already out there that have some terrific ideas of mixing and matching transmog from different armor types to create something like really awesome. But I would like to see things being loosened up a little bit more. Like I was just talking a little bit earlier during stream, hey, it'd be cool if I can take my shield and transmog that into just a normal offhand so I can look like that I'm dual wielding 2 tankers of terror. I don't know. Next question. Are we ever going to see increased character customization, like being able to make minor adjustments to height, eye color, etc.? They did address this. They said that when it comes to height, that's something that is more like a limitation of the system. That's when it comes to not just being able to adjust your character, but having them be able to fit through things, there would be problems. And I guess that they don't want to mess around with the collision detection either. But when it comes to the eye color and of course the etc., those are things that they want to address in the future. So high elves, sure, you can have, I guess you can have void elves or whatever elves that can have blue eyes, and then boom, that makes all the difference, I guess. Although I would think to myself, what is the difference between a blood elf with blue eyes and a high elf with blue eyes? They'd all look the same. Who would get mad? Next question. With Zandalari and Cool Turns now released, when can we expect information about the next set of allied races? I think that Ian's answer basically summed up to the time of least convenience. To be more specific, he said that it was going to be similar to how the previous iterations of allied races were introduced, the Cool Turns and the Zandalari and other such things. The problem with something like that, though, is that as soon as you announce it, just the announcement would make people say, when? Oh my god, when? I'm actually not happy about the answer because it leads to these lofty expectations among players and fans and critics who are like, oh my god, I really want to play the Fox People. When can we play the Fox People? They announced it last week. Can we do it next week? Oh, how about the next patch? Oh, it's not the next expansion. Oh, it's not until the middle of the next expansion. What the F? And even though it's entirely Blizzard's intent and maybe they're just excited to share it with everyone, announcing it that early is not a good idea, in my opinion. I think that the when of, hey, when can we expect stuff to come in, should be like, oh, here's a new PTR build. Guess what? We can be ethereals now. Oh, snap. I guess at the very least, if nothing else, don't talk about allied races on like the box. Don't talk about them on like the splash screen where you're trying to sell the expansion, because that's going to create, like I said, these really unnecessary expectations. Next question. I absolutely love the allied race unlock quest lines. Have you considered making them repeatable by alts? They could be seen as chapters of the war campaign. They have not considered making them repeatable, although it would be cool to redo the Maghar unlock scenario over and over again for that one thing where you launch this ball and it homes in on it. It's a pretty cool quest line. Ian talked about some minor technical things that make it not really a thing to do, at least at the moment, but they could always, work on it and make that happen. As for whether I would want them to be, it seems to satisfy me well enough. I definitely wouldn't want to see it as a chapter in the war campaign that I would feel compelled or feel forced to complete on my alt yet again. I do like that for the most part the allied race quest lines are considered side quests, and I think I prefer it that way. Next question. Leveling is faster but still dull due to slow drips of abilities over long periods of time. Are there any intentions to address not just the speed of leveling, but the quality of the time spent? Ian and Josh made a really good point that you shouldn't be able to earn 120 of anything. That amount of stuff is very daunting. It's difficult to design for, and it potentially just doesn't feel very fulfilling to earn 120 of whatever, let alone levels. Ian said that they are seriously considering a level squish. For example, bringing things down instead of 120 levels, you knock it down to like 60. And I never thought that they would talk about this. They addressed two conflicting points. That one, how awkward would it be to log in and see that your former level 120 character is now only level 60? What would that do to the identity of WoW when it comes to just kind of looking at how much your characters have done over the past 14, 15 years? On the other hand, gaining a bunch of levels but not seeing anything for it other than some minor base stat changes doesn't really feel good either. The problem that I personally have with them level squishing is that it justifies them keeping the talent system as it is, because I think it sucks. So here's my little suggestion, even though I know this is very weak and it's not being thought through at all really. Take the talent system as it is right now. You know, with the 7 or so rows and the 3 columns, and increase the number of columns. Give a bunch load more columns, and as you're leveling, you unlock more segments onto these columns so that you increase your customization without necessarily bloating all the different kinds of talent selections that you have. So you still have, 7 or so kinds of selections to make on your talents, but the number of options that you have will increase as you're leveling up. That's it. So it's not 120 of something, but it's a lot more of whatever. That's just one idea. There are tons and tons out there, and I hope that folks like you and I are able to give our input and that Blizzard is listening to it. Next question. Are there any older design philosophies that you're rediscovering as you develop Classic that you're considering returning to in the modern version of the game? Things that make the game feel more like a living world and an RPG perhaps? What's funny is that Ian sarcastically said, well, removing portals and flight and such, that makes it look more like a living world. I know that he said it sarcastically, but he meant it. Ian didn't get too far into this question. He talked about the emphasis of trying to bring a better sense of community into modern WoW, but he also didn't want a jarring feeling of people feeling like they can't do anything unless they're in a group. I still regularly see people comment about certain things that just turn them off because they have to do things in LFR, or they have to do things in a group in order to get things done, or they have to go into a dungeon in order to get crafting materials. But I think that this question, while it should be asked, that it's hard to really decide that if there should be things that are taken from the Classic philosophy and apply it to the modern game, because Classic isn't out yet. The lessons that need to be learned haven't been learned yet. You know what I mean? I think that this question should be addressed again, but later on, a couple months from now, when Classic WoW is out, people are able to jump in and give their feedback on the game and provide their really their boots on the ground comparisons from the Classic to the modern game. Next question. Will there be dedicated servers for role-playing on Classic? Yes, there will be, although they did say that they're going to limit it to larger regions and not the smaller ones, but it's really going to depend on demand as well as how the populations are being distributed. From there, Blizzard will adjust things and make things happen based on demand. Next question. Is the communities feature worth putting dev resources into moving forward? It seems to have caused more issues than it solved, and there have not been many changes to the tools we can use to manage them. We only lost guild management tools. This is something that was a little bit more difficult for them to answer because part of what they did with communities has a lot to do with BattleNet, and so I guess there's just technical reasons why there are some difficulties in getting things kind of the way that they were before. Blizzard is working on getting some of those things back, but I'm not very fond of the question nor the answer. Part of it is because it's a little bit hard to tell whether or not communities have been successful or if they're a dumpster fire because we can't really see anything. Ian talked about how there are communities that help to push mythic keys or transmog runs and those sorts of things, but there's no way for us to really know about it. There's no reliable way to advertise that stuff. I've mentioned over and over again, hey, why don't you somehow feature a community on like the splash screen or even the launcher? Okay, maybe not the launcher, but as soon as you log in, it's like, boom, here's a featured community that you might consider joining. It's for Mythic Plus or it's for roleplay. This might be cool. That sort of visibility isn't what I'd consider spam. It's just, hey, here's a thing. Maybe you can take a look at it or maybe you can ignore it. Sometimes I'm not very fond of the invisible hand of Blizzard, but in a case like this, when you're trying to promote other communities, I think it's okay to highlight a community that is doing good for everybody. Next question. Players that focus on one faction often do not experience the entirety of the in-game narrative. Is the two sides to every tale achievement indicative of possible future incentives to play both factions? Nope, is his answer, and I fully support that. Part of the identity of the World of Warcraft, as much as some people don't like it, is that there are two sides. There's a Horde side and there's the Alliance side. And as Ian explained, there are many players that stick to one faction, and I'm one of those people. Having that sort of, I guess, ignorance for the other faction is what helps to create this whole World of Warcraft identity, even though more often than not it can seem very toxic and abrasive at times. But that's a lot of what WoW is. It is a difference of perspective. It feels like two different games when you experience the other side and you get to understand, oh, so that's why that thing happened. It didn't look like that from my end. So I definitely wouldn't want to feel incentivized, especially from a power level. It's like, I don't want to complete both the Horde and Alliance storylines so that way my Heart of Azeroth can get some sort of dope upgrade or something. Part of the joy in WoW is, in fact, to experience both sides of the story. But part of the identity of WoW is to acknowledge that there's a difference. Next question. What are your thoughts on gold as currency in WoW today? Are you happy with the cost of repairs and gold gained from completing quests? And what are your thoughts on the prevalence of players offering services in exchange for gold? Ian was like, gold is good, you know. It wasn't that simple, but Ian explained the use of gold in the overall WoW economy. But he addressed two things in this question: the abundance or the possible overabundance in gold, as well as gold carrying services. When it comes to the day in the life of a player in the World of Warcraft, for the most part, the things that you do normally should be enough to get you by when it comes to repairs, the occasional transmog, maybe a nice thing every now and then. When it comes to more lofty stuff, there should be a feeling of friction, a feeling of earning something or working hard to get to the thing that you want. It shouldn't be so trivial to get yourself a Brontosaurus mount. But when it comes to services, that's something that doesn't quite have to do with gold, because it first has to do with supply, and there's plenty of supply, well, and there's plenty of demand too. Ian admitted that there isn't much to do to address the problem of selling services other than trying to control the conversation and at the very least trying to not make it so intrusive. The thing is, you can't stop these kinds of services from being done. If they were to knock out or otherwise make gold carrying services against the TOS, well, people are still going to do it, but then people are just going to use other methods such as cash. So at the very, very least, it's making participants of these gold carrying services feel safe. Next question. Will the Demon Hunter realm restrictions be removed at any point during or after BFA? Yes, they will, but they just don't have a time frame for that at the moment. He talked about how he doesn't exactly want an army of demon hunters being made on a given realm so they can farm the same thing over and over again with a level 100 character. At some point though, the time is going to come where they're going to stop carrying. It's just not going to be anytime soon. Next question. Several fights in Boda and Mythic have been particularly punishing to guilds with heavy melee comps. Going forward, will we see fights that aren't so punishing on composition based on range versus melee? This is probably the question that gets all the time in every raid forever and ever and ever. This is pretty much an ad lib. You can swap out the raid name as well as ranged and melee. You can just kind of transpose those or switch them around and ta-da, there's your question. This is something that Blizzard has to deal with all the freaking time. It was interesting though when Ian talked about how, hey, there are some fights that are range heavy, there are some fights that are melee heavy, and there are some that are neutral. Neutral. Why not just keep it neutral? My guess is that having fights that are always neutral all the time forever would limit the kind of creativity that's possible when doing encounter design. It would also make raid comps across the board, whether it's the low or the high end, feel really static, and I would say not dynamic. I would risk even saying that it would be boring. It's not unlike having to make sure that you have 2 tanks and a number of healers and a number of DPS. If it always felt like you had to have this many boomkin, this many rogues, this many paladins or whatever, then I think that would affect things across the board when it comes to creating groups. So this question is going to exist like forever. I think that's okay. Is there a specific reason why BFA dungeons don't give rep related to their respective zones? I would love to see this return. This is going to sound a little bit silly, but the reasoning is that they didn't design it this way. A lot of people go back to the days of yore when you were going into dungeons to do rep runs, or you threw on a tabard, and when you get into a dungeon wearing this tabard, then you would get reputation based on the tabard that you wore, and that's not a bad thing. However, when it comes to BFA reputations, a lot of it is, in fact, at least at the moment, it's tied to world quests and outdoor contents like Ian was talking about. So with regards to those reps, it's too late. But what about reps that come in later? These kinds of reputations can be tied to very specific content. I totally forgot the name off the top of my head, but there's a reputation that you used to earn from Karazhan that would let you earn stuff. That was a reputation that you got specifically from that dungeon and pretty much nowhere else. You could also think of content in the Burning Crusade, how you can farm certain mobs in the outdoors until you got to a certain reputation, and then you wouldn't get anything. From there, you had to progress into the dungeons in order to get farther. And I think after a while that stopped too, and then you had to go into heroics and, that sort of thing. The other part of the answer came to addressing the path of least resistance. If it was possible to farm dungeons for rep, and that would happen to be the fastest way to do it, then, well, guess what? A bunch of people are going to farm dungeons. And speaking for myself, I would freaking hate that. But I wouldn't mind having the option of both. There are world quests that have you go into a dungeon, and from there, I believe you get rep from said reputation related to that world quest. But as long as I'm not feeling forced to do things like a certain way, I'm totally fine with that. It's just that at the moment, I'm fine with doing a couple of boat missions, an emissary or so, and, I can very easily get to Exalted the way that I am now. And the final question. Hunters have Hati back. Xalatath appears in a questline. Any chance Demologs will get to see Thalkil again? I don't like that it's pronounced Hati. I like Hati. Hati, yeah. Ian was being kind of coy about this one. He didn't specifically say that, yes, you're going to see Thalkil again, but wherever it makes sense or wherever the opportunity arises, yes, we'd love to see old characters or artifact weapons in this case that are gone. We'd love to see them come back. And that about wraps it up. I hope that this happened to be much shorter than the actual Q&A. So if you enjoyed this coverage, please hit that like button and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.